Hey, what's up, guys? It's Price recording another of these back to basics hybrid workouts. This is actually the last of the little back to basics I'm doing. I wouldn't say I'm doing full on periodization, but I got to a place in my life where I have a lot more free time. And so I've stopped doing these workouts where I'm just doing it all at once. I'm actually a big fan of doing splits in terms of workout format within a weekly basis. I just was at a time where I really only had, maybe a few hours a week I could just go. And so I tried to hammer everything out. You can tell here I'm kind of seeing the ramifications of that. This is before my deload. I'm super tired. I'm super stiff at this point. The fatigue is really mounting, and it was quite a hot day. But I still feel like I got some good work in. Even though I enjoy this kind of like full body, do everything at once format, there's definitely kind of drawbacks where you start getting to a point where whatever you're doing secondary just becomes a little bit less high quality reps. Like you start to suffer a little bit in terms of form and technique. Even if you have a high work capacity, it's just not possible to maintain the exact same level of effort throughout the whole set. Yeah, and I always find like the second workout I do, second to last workout I do before a deload is usually pretty good. And then the last workout I do is kind of a crapshoot. And you can see here I'm really fatigued. I left in some of the mistakes too, just to show I usually don't fumble this much. I'm usually not this like clumsy, but I think it literally was just fatigue from, a high stress schedule, which thankfully I don't have anymore. So my next video is after like a long, almost 2 week long deload, and I come back and I'm a lot stronger, less fatigued, and I can kind of do a split. I think it's important to show the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not every workout is perfect, and I think it'd be unrealistic to create this expectation where you're always going to have a workout that looks pretty. I felt like this was still productive in terms of the work I was doing, but it's definitely not as technical or as clean as I would typically like. I'm definitely a little bit of a perfectionist when it comes to technique, and so looking at this video, all I can see is like the minor mistakes I'm making that I would like to correct in the future. Once again, that kind of hammers the importance of why doing a split is really good once you get to an intermediate or advanced level. Perfect practice makes perfect execution. And I think that if you really are doing things that are highly technical, there's a lot of benefit to doing a split just so that you have that refreshed nervous system and you're able to keep like hammering technique. Otherwise, you're just going to really beat yourself up or get suboptimal training results. So again, this is something that this kind of doing everything on one workout was just born out of necessity. It's not born out of what's optimal or most practical for most people, including myself. These kind of workouts I could really only squeeze in maybe 2 times a week versus the usual like 4 or 5 times a week of training I get where I do splits. And it definitely is, you're just really sore afterwards. You're kind of fatigued everywhere. You don't really get that benefit of doing a split where some areas are somewhat recovered so that you don't have to worry about like, oh, every area of your body is fried. But for this, it's like everything's fried. So really attempting to do almost anything is just going to be pretty suboptimal. Any other workouts I would try to squeeze in during the week are just kind of going to be sloppy as a result. I definitely pushed the line when it came to recovery. I think this is where I got like a bit of a pec strain. Well, not technically this. I did a workout, I believe the day after, where I was exploring some new calisthenics areas. I got really overzealous and I kind of tweaked my pecs, which is part of the reason I did a long deload. There have been times when I don't deload quickly enough where I just ignore the signs from my nervous system that it's time to quit. And I always find that I get injured. Like it's not anything major usually, hopefully, but it's just like a sign that my body's like connective tissues give out. So it's like my nervous system gets fried first and the training suffers, and then the connective tissue are the next to go if I just ignore my body's signals that I need to dial it back. The other thing you'll find is that, at least for me, there's just like a lack of motivation. Like when you don't feel good, you don't feel motivated. And it's not like every workout you're going to feel fantastic. You're just going to have a few fluke workouts. But if you're hitting a point where like 2 or 3 workouts in a row, you're really unmotivated, you're really fatigued, you probably have hit a point of necessity for the deload. I've probably said this before, but I think that all training boils down to essentially fatigue management. You have a certain reservoir of energy and you have a certain reservoir of things that you can handle, like a pool that you can draw from, and you can't go beyond exhausting that pool and still get good results. So instead of trying to overreach all of the time and completely wrecking yourself, risking injury, risking suboptimal training, it's better to think, what pool of energy do I have? And then to make the absolute most of it. So cutting out the non essential, trying to do what you can with what you have. It becomes a much more practical uh, set of decisions. These kettlebell squats were not the best. I find when I get really fatigued, I kind of go into a wider stance. I already have big hips, so I tend to go wide. But when I really get into this weird, almost bow-legged stance, I don't know how to describe it. It usually is a sign that I'm pretty tight and fatigued. So there's just a lot of symbols. I mean, you could just look at my eyes and you can see, like, wow, he is totally exhausted by this point. Like, this was just kind of a willpower uh, workout. It's funny. I feel like one of the benefits of filming my training that I didn't really initially take advantage of is that it actually gives you a bit of an impartial view into how your training went. Sometimes when you're in the moment, you're fatigued or whatever, you're not really seeing how things actually look. And I don't think I noticed how many mistakes I was making, which is just a sign of the physical and mental fatigue. I'm, watching this days later and I'm like, wow, I was just really sloppy. Anybody who walked by could probably see that I was just gutting it out. Anyways, now that I'm going back to the split format, the basic format I'm doing is I'm incorporating biking again because I am training for a long bike trip. I don't think I've mentioned this before, but I have done a really long bike packing trip about 2 years ago, and I'm planning to do another one at the end of the summer. So my rucking and all other non-essential cardio has been replaced, and I'm just doing a cycling and maybe a little bit of like rowing or something to cross train that has a lot of carryover to biking. I think that with cardio, I'm not necessarily as picky with what exercise I do. It's a lot of the adaptations to cardio are pretty generalist. Like, as long as you're doing something that's engaging a lot of muscle groups, you are going to get a lot of the benefits, like your heart, your circulatory system. Those things don't change too much. I do think there's something to be said for like local endurance adaptations. Like, for example, me biking is not going to really help my upper body endurance at all. But I think that I can compensate for that with calisthenics training and the kettlebells. I still am doing some muscular endurance work. So it might not be perfect, but it's good enough, if that makes sense. And sometimes it's not worth worrying about all the essentials. As much as I like to train to be a generalist, you still have to pick certain specific tangible goals you want. You can't do everything and be good. You have to pick like what's worthwhile for you. But if I were to recommend, I guess, a more generalist approach to cardio, I'd probably pick one upper body dominant cardio and then one lower body, depending on how much you're doing. If you're specializing for an event, like you're training for a race, something like that, you really need to just stick to the main thing. And then most endurance programming has some sort of cross training, but I generally consider the strength training to be that cross training component, since you're already getting a lot of your cardiovascular training in that uh, daily grind. Yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is cardio does matter, like having cardiovascular fitness does matter, but what specific cardio you're doing, unless you have like specific goals related to it, is not super important. So if you're just a strength athlete, I'd say just pick the one that you find enjoyable. If you love running, go running. If you like biking, go biking. Like, whatever fits your lifestyle and whatever you kind of have an aptitude for, there's no reason not to just do that if you're still getting the general cardiovascular adaptations that you want. At the same time, I am curious, just out of my own interest in training, of what, if I were to pick like maybe two cardio exercises, what could get the most bang for my buck, every muscle in my body is worked kind of thing. I'm thinking it would probably be rowing, and then maybe swimming, or the ski erg actually is a pretty good antagonist from what I've seen of it. I've not got to try a ski erg, but I am pretty interested. I know that there are some kettlebell channels. I think Levi's Harder to Kill Arsenal or whatever. I can't remember what his real name is. He's a super ripped bald guy. He's like absolutely shredded. I think he's in his 40s, but he has like the body of like a 26-year-old. He has a way better body than me, and I'm 26, so, good for him. But anyways, I see him, besides doing a lot of kettlebell training, it seems like he has a ski erg set up in his gym. And so I imagine that that must have a pretty large tricep component if he's using that just to kind of keep that adaptation, because I believe he does sports style kettlebell training, which for those of you who don't know is like you're basically doing a maximum set of repetitions of certain ballistic exercises for like 5 to 10 minutes. So here I am just getting into the conditioning work. I was just trying to do a sapate with the rings. It worked fairly well, but trying to catch the rings with your hands is kind of annoying. I did figure out the sapate form a little bit from doing this though, which was nice. You basically have to kind of bounce into that Hindu squat. Otherwise, it's just you're doing kind of a burpee with a Hindu push-up. And so it's a little bit different. There's a bit more of like a dynamism to it. Then here I am doing some archer push-ups. I don't often do these, and I think you can tell, because I'm really not surprised that I got a bit of a minor pec strain after this. I'm guessing the two of these things combined together at the end of the deload, sort of introducing them last minute, was not really the best call. I do love the sapate though. I think I probably would just do it on the ground in the future. But for anyone who likes burpee style training, the sapate is, the P1 wrestler equivalent of that. And I actually like it better because the Hindu squat is a little bit more evenly distributed in terms of the muscular effort. You get more tricep, you get a little bit more core engagement, or at least in a different way where you're like, bending your spine and then extending it. And you also get just a little bit more of a range of motion. You kind of go from vertical to horizontal and then pushing downwards. So it's a really good complete press, and you just get your whole body's worked. You get a lot of mobility in it as well. It's really just like one perfect training exercise for the entire anterior chain. I really like them. I think they're great. I wish I was better at them. I feel like it's one of those exercises where the better I get at it, the more it reaps benefits for other areas of my training. I also obviously am a big fan of Matt Fury's style of training. He has a lot of Hindu squats, a lot of Hindu push-ups. And so the sapate is just a really easy way to combine those two things. So you're saving a ton of time and you're doing a more challenging variation. So if those two things individually have become too easy for you, then you can just keep doing that. I'm also talking a little bit because I ran into another guy and we kind of trained together. So he actually brought his own rings, and so we were kind of chatting. But I haven't filmed him out of respect for his privacy. But he was a pretty cool dude. So that was nice because I rarely run into people that actually train calisthenics as well. You can really tell I was spending a lot of time in classes this semester because I am still very not tan. I'm never that tan, but man, I'm just looking like a ghost out here. Yeah, this was a surprisingly strong finish to the workout, though. I don't know. I think it was just a mental thing because physically I was feeling pretty beat up. My nervous system obviously wasn't there all the way. I think I'm just getting a lot stronger in general. And then here I'm just doing some ring stuff. So this is actually the rings that the person I ran into had set up. We just kind of alternated using the low rings and the high rings so that we had less setup. So that was nice. This is just shoulder pirouettes. I used to do a lot of different hanging variations, but I found this one tends to hit almost everything I need, where it's one arm hanging and I'm rotating through space. A lot of times you need to think of even stuff like hanging and some of these more like esoteric accessories. You can still progress them, and then you can get to a more advanced variation. And then here I am just demonstrating some rows. I was just doing these. Yeah, so I did some basic rows just as a demo for this other guy because he was curious about my thoughts on that. And then I go into these sit back rows. So basically the purpose of this is you're just training that kind of locked in bicep position, but you're doing it with a lot less weight. And then, well, I'm not even sure what I'm doing here yet. I forgot something. Oh, no, I'm just doing more of it, but a little bit lower. These are super tough on the bicep, but they're great for getting into the more advanced ring skills. I was reading a lot on the ring skills, and basically everything that I've read indicates that upper back strength and then kind of the strength of your arm flexors and your forearms are the most important determinant of your success with the gymnastics rings. I do a mix of pressing work and pulling work on the gymnastics rings, but even if you're doing that, you're still going to need really strong arms. Like even the more pressing type movements are going to require a lot of bicep mobility. I'd say probably the third most important muscle group is the chest. And so I imagine part of the reason I got the pec strain is just that my pecs are not nearly as conditioned as my biceps and my pulling musculature is. I think that's a bit of leverage and just honestly a bit of neglect. Like for many years, I really didn't prioritize chest training. It wasn't something I excelled at, and so I fell into the fallacy of not devoting a lot of time to it, which is a really stupid idea. And I could just tell that my tendons and ligaments are just way less adapted to the load. So my chest is way less tolerant of volume and intensity than the corresponding pulling muscle groups are. My strategy going forward with that is just to keep the pressing movements a little bit less intense while I wait for my body to catch up. You should be doing a little bit more pulling than pressing work, anyways, in order to keep things balanced. You do want a stronger posterior chain to keep everything, healthy and functioning. But you probably don't need like right now. I'd say I'm probably doing like a 1.5 to 1 ratio. And that might be a bit much.